Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show, I wanted to talk about one of the teams in college basketball that has really been struggling over the last couple weeks, and that is Tom Izzo and his Michigan State Spartans. And one common theme that I have noticed with this college basketball season is that Michigan State, along with many other blue bloods, Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, teams that we've spoken about a lot on this show throughout the start of college basketball season, they've been struggling. And I think Michigan State is another team that we could put in that group that historically, they're blue blood. Historically, we know that no matter what struggles they have early on in the season, we usually just expect them to find a way to be able to turn it up by March and be able to a big time push towards the NCAA tournament come March. But unfortunately, along with many of the other blue bloods, that has not been the case for the Michigan State Spartans so far this season at all. And I'm not here making excuses. I think that when you look at a team like Michigan State and all of the talent that they have in Joey Hauser and Rocket Watts and Aaron Henry, Josh Langford, Malik Hall, Gabe Brown, and a coach like Tom Izzo, with all of that talent, even in a COVID season, I don't think there would be any reason to expect Michigan State to be this bad ever. I just think they have too much talent. But at the same time, I don't think it's shocking when you consider everything that has went on with a bunch of the other blue bloods in college basketball that Michigan State is all of a sudden struggling right now, because Michigan State has been really killed by COVID. And once again, I'm not using that as an excuse. I just think it's a legitimate reason why Michigan State may just be struggling and not playing very good basketball right now. From a span of January 9th to January 28th, so a span of almost 20 days, the Michigan State basketball program did not participate in a game, and their last game before that big pause was a heartbreaking blown lead against Purdue at home. And really, since that game, the two times we've seen the Michigan State Spartans, they have not looked good at all. Now, there could be plenty of other reasons for that. We all know how tough of a league the Big Ten is. Michigan State went to a desperate Rutgers team on the road the other night, and they looked outmatched. Their leading scorer in the game was Aaron Henry with 7 points. They scored 37 points in total. That's all you need to know about just how bad the Michigan State Spartans were on Thursday against Rutgers. But then they come back on Sunday against Ohio State, and I totally understand. The Ohio State Buckeyes are a really good team. They are a team right now that I have ranked inside the top 10 of my top 25. But I mean, man, at the same time, let's face the facts here. Ohio State should not be beating you by 17 points and really controlling you throughout the whole game when you're desperate to win and when you need a win as much as possible. And that is exactly what happened to Michigan State on Sunday against the Buckeyes. It is approaching towards the end of January. I believe that in a COVID season, a regular season, whatever kind of basketball season that we're playing in, now is the time that we really start to find out answers in terms of, okay, how good exactly is this team? What player, in order for this team to play well, needs to step up? Which player needs to expand his role? Which player does a certain team need in order to get the job done in a big-time situation? And I think when you look at a team like Michigan State, a bad side for them going forward is that we really do not have the answer to many of these questions. And that starts at the point guard position, because right now, Michigan State is still really searching for an answer at point guard. Michigan State has now started 3 different point guards this season and have changed the position twice in the last month. And this is where I think, as a coach, Tom Izzo needs to step back and say, all right, I need to find an answer. Because after the game, after he was asked, Tom Izzo's response to the point guard position at Michigan State was, I don't know. And I think that when you look at this Michigan State team, it's just a lot of people rotating in and out, a lot of guys expecting to try to step up for the role, but it's not getting the job done. Rocket Watts, I love him as a off-the-ball two-guard. I think we saw last year just how dynamic he could be when you pair him with a guy like Cassius Winston, who knows how to handle, who knows how to get other guys around him open shots. But to be honest, since Rocket Watts has had responsibility for the ball being in his hand at basically all times, it hasn't really been looking that good. He's only averaging 9 points a game, 3.2 assists per game, about 1.5 turnovers per game, and is only shooting about 28% from three. In order for Michigan State to be the best team they could be, they're going to need him to do a little bit better than that. The other guy is Aaron Henry, and I totally understand that right now he is Michigan State's leading scorer. He's scoring 13 points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, about 3.5 steals per game, about assists per game, and then about 1.5 steals per game. But I think this guy as a shooter just needs to be more consistent. He is only shooting 21% from three. If Michigan State wants to be good, that number is really going to have to go up. Joey Hauser, he's been pretty consistent. He's been pretty good. He's averaging 11 and 7 right now. But when you're playing him at the 5, and that could, even though it's a small lineup, that could give you some weaknesses in terms of your toughness, in terms of your rebounding. And when you look at guys like Malik Hall and Julius Marble, you just don't necessarily know. Thomas Kithier, Marcus Bingham, right? You don't necessarily know if those guys at the end of the day are going to be able to just look at the other team in the eye and say, all right, this is why we're Michigan State. This is why we're better than you. And they're not going to really be able to force and impose their will. And here's another reason why I think Michigan State is struggling right now. And once again, I'm not trying to use this as an excuse. I'm just stating the facts. I think when you lose players as good and as valuable as Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman, especially in a COVID year, but really in any ordinary year as well, you are going to need to learn how to play without those guys. And unfortunately, I just don't think Michigan State has done that so far. I mean, look at some of the losses Michigan State has had throughout Big Ten play. Losing to Northwestern on the road by 14. That was an upset. That was a surprise to many. But I feel like many people were just like, all right, it's a bad game. Move on. It just happens. Then Michigan State loses at home to Wisconsin by 9. And that game was on Christmas Day. That was a game that many people did expect the Spartans to win. And they did control throughout most of the game. It was close up until midway through the second half when Wisconsin just took over and went into the Breslin Center and won. And then they lose, and not only lose, but get absolutely demolished on the road to the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Now, they followed up with a big-time road win against Nebraska, a big home win against Rutgers by 23, and that was when the game against Purdue happened on January 8th. And I watched that game against Purdue. That was a game that Michigan State really was able to lead and control throughout. And at the time, Purdue wasn't really playing that good of basketball, but still, the Boilermakers were able to go into the Breslin Center and just steal that game from the Spartans. And since then, Michigan State just really has not been the same basketball team, and that is a big, big problem. And I totally understand why Michigan State is struggling right now. Cassius Winston is literally probably the best point guard in program history since Magic Johnson, since Mateen Cleaves. I think people underrate just how good and just how important of a player Xavier Tillman is, as he right now is getting big-time quality minutes in the NBA as a starting big man. And I remember talking about it with Michigan State last year, that when they lost Matt McQuaid and when they lost Kenny Goins, two very important players to the team at Michigan State 2 years ago that actually ended up making the Final Four. Last year, it was clear to me, especially early on in the season, that Michigan State was just flat out missing those guys. And in order for Michigan State to be the best team as possible, they're going to need other guys to fill into those kind of players' roles. And Michigan State, just when the season shut down last year, they were playing some really good basketball. They were playing some of the best basketball in the Big Ten, which was really the first time since the preseason where they were ranked number 1, where we were watching the Michigan State Spartans and we thought to ourselves, okay, this is the team we expected. And when you look at Michigan State right now, their problems, I just don't necessarily know, are fixable. If you don't have a point guard, it's not going to take you until February or January to find out who exactly that is, or it's not going to just, the point guard that you're looking for is not just going to magically appear out of nowhere. And if Tom Izzo wants to just face the fact that right now on his roster, it doesn't really look like he has one that could get the job done for the Spartans, all right, that's fine. You just need to find other important ways for your team to win and for your team to succeed. And right now, looking at Michigan State and the way their pieces are built, I'm not necessarily sure if they could do that. They just look very similar to me to a team like Duke, a team like Kentucky that has just a ton of talent, but they don't exactly know how to use it because they're just inexperienced playing with each other. They don't know how exactly each player plays, and they don't know what exactly each player's strengths and weaknesses are. And right now, when you look at Michigan State, their offense is just abysmal. They don't have a true ball handler, and we all know that Rocket Watts, as great as the player he is, as much as I love watching him and as high as I was on him going into the preseason, I think we're just going to have to face the facts that right now, Michigan State, they cannot be playing him on the ball. They are not a very good basketball team when he's playing on the one at point guard. And the problem is Foster Loyer and A.J. Huggard are not really much better options. So Michigan State, as some people expected, are having a very tough time replacing Cassius Winston. Besides replacing Winston, I thought Michigan State had the potential to be one of the better teams in the Big Ten when you look at some of the surrounding wings around that point guard spot, like Henry, like Watts, like Joey Hauser. But it's guys like Gabe Brown, it's guys like Malik Hall, it's guys like Marcus Bingham that I heard a lot of hype about. These guys were supposed to be that next group of Michigan State Spartan players that fill into that Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman role, and unfortunately they haven't been able to do that so far. Now I know I totally understand it's still very early in the career of A.J. Huggard as a young point guard. By the time he's a sophomore, by the time he's a junior, I'm sure he'll be able to improve and really, as a former top 100 recruit, be able to show everyone just how good of a player he is. But when I watch Michigan State right now, all I need to know is that he is not ready right now to run a good tournament Big Ten caliber team at point guard. And to be honest, I'm not necessarily sure if anyone on Michigan State is. Josh Langford, a guy that has been injured over the last couple years, we all know how solid of a player he could be, but at the same time, it was always going to be unreasonable to ask Josh Langford to come back and be one of the top-notch contributors in not only the Michigan State locker room, but really in the whole Big Ten. We know how experienced he is and how many big games he's been able to play in throughout his career, but he doesn't look like the same player as he did pre-injury, which shouldn't necessarily be a shock to anyone, but he hasn't been the player that Michigan State has expected so far this season. And Henry, Hauser, and Watts, as good as those three guys could be all individually, as a team right now, when you watch Michigan State, they're just not playing well. And when you look at the upcoming schedule, it really doesn't get much easier, because following the loss to Rutgers and following the loss to Ohio State, their next game is at Iowa. That's not going to be easy. They then will host Nebraska. Okay, that should hopefully be a win. They then will host Penn State. That should hopefully be a win. They then host Iowa, go to Purdue, go to Indiana, host Ohio State, go to Maryland. Like, are these games right now that when you watch Michigan State, you're like, oh, they're going to win? Because when I watch Michigan State, that's not what I am seeing at all right now. The good thing is, if you're a Spartan fan, the fact that you play in the Big Ten, that is going to give you a lot of different opportunities to collect quality wins to try to get you in the NCAA tournament. But at the same time, Michigan State needs to just focus on beating whoever is in front of their schedule right now, and it's not going to get any easier after they go on the road to Iowa. We all know, especially with the Hawkeyes coming off of a loss against Illinois, that was one of the better games of the college basketball season that I've watched so far. Michigan State needs to be better. They need to be better as a team. They need to be better distributing the basketball, and this is a challenge for Tom Izzo, because I believe Michigan State right now is in a very similar spot to a traditional blue blood like Duke and Kentucky and Kansas. All three teams really struggling right now, and it's funny because when Michigan State went into Duke during the Champions Classic and won, everyone was like, oh, wow, what a big-time win for Michigan State. They are the surprise team in the Big Ten. I remember they were ranked in the top 10 at one point very early on in the season, but you watch Michigan State, you realize, wow, that Duke team just flat out wasn't very good. Maybe that is really the reason why they were able to go into Cameron and just blow the doors off them. And now when you watch the Spartans, all you need to know is that this team is not playing very good basketball, and they need to get better quick.